The sound of splashing wasn't what woke me up, it was the laughter. The kind of loud, wine-fueled cackling that vibrates straight through a window screen at 2:47 in the morning. I sat up, half thinking I was dreaming, until a cheer erupted that sounded like someone had just landed a cannonball. My heart sank. I grabbed my phone, opened the backyard camera feed, and there they were. 11 people, including my least favorite human on this planet, Karen, our HOA president, frolicking in my pool like it was a hotel resort. And she wasn't just swimming. She was drinking out of my glass pitcher, lounging on my favorite floatie, and DJing from a Bluetooth speaker she must have dragged in herself. My finger hovered over the call button, but I paused. Because what Karen didn't know, what no one in that pool knew, was that I had installed a little security system of my own, a harmless, heat-activated dye that turns skin blue after 10 minutes in the water. I had no idea I was about to witness the most satisfying shade of petty karma I'd ever seen. I threw on a robe and quietly stepped out onto my patio, staying just behind the side hedges. From that angle, I had a full view of the pool without being spotted. Karen was holding court like she owned the place, her platinum hair piled into a messy bun that drooped with humidity, barking orders like, "No glass in the pool," as if she had suddenly appointed herself lifeguard of a property she had absolutely no right to be on. A guy in a tank top was attempting to balance a beer bottle on his forehead, while a woman in a sequined swimsuit shouted, "This water feels amazing." I couldn't help but smile. It was only a matter of minutes now. The dye was originally installed months ago after a string of late-night dip incidents. Kids sneaking in, someone stealing my chair cushions, and once, weirdly, an entire watermelon. My cousin, a chemical engineer, gave me the idea. He said, "You can't stop trespassers, but you can humiliate them." It was brilliant. The dye was invisible in water, non-toxic, and only activated by sustained body heat, making it perfect for people who stayed in the pool longer than 5 minutes. It took about 10 minutes to fully kick in. And Karen's crew had already been in for 15. I watched the moment it hit. The woman in the sequined suit looked down at her arm and screamed, "What the hell? Why am I blue?" Another man stood up in the shallow end and yelled, "Bro, what is this? Is this algae? Am I dying?" Karen rushed over, her legs now visibly blue from the knee down, and tried to calm everyone with a totally fake smile. "It's just pool light reflections. Probably from the chlorine." But then someone flipped on their phone flashlight and the truth was exposed. Arms, legs, necks. Bright cerulean blue like they'd rolled in cotton candy dye. The panic was glorious. Guests scrambled out of the water, slipping on the deck, falling into patio chairs, shouting over each other. Someone threw a towel that only smeared the blue worse. A drunk guy tried to rinse off using my hose, but only managed to get it tangled around his legs and fall into a potted plant. Karen, trying desperately to keep it together, looked like she was on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Her face was half smeared with blue, streaks running down like abstract war paint. She screamed, "Everyone shut up. Just calm down, we'll figure this out." But no one was listening anymore. It was full-blown chaos. I finally stepped into the motion light. Karen froze. Her eyes met mine with a mixture of horror and rage that only made this moment sweeter. "What did you do to us?" she barked, stomping toward me in my stolen flip-flops. I crossed my arms and said, "I think the better question is, what are you doing in my backyard at 3 in the morning with 11 uninvited guests?" She puffed up like a balloon ready to pop and shouted, "I was checking on the community pool standards. Your pool is under HOA jurisdiction as part of shared view preservation." This was a test. I laughed. Not just because the lie was weak, but because she had the audacity to say it while her forehead looked like it had been dipped in blueberry syrup. One of her friends, a tall guy who hadn't said much, walked up and said, "Ma'am, I think I'm going to the ER. I don't know what kind of chemical warfare you just exposed us to." I turned to him and calmly said, "It's food-grade dye, same kind they use in Gatorade. Totally harmless. But trespassing? That's not. I let the words sink in. Karen tried to regain control, wiping her arms furiously with a towel that only made it worse. I'm filing a complaint. This is entrapment. You can't just booby-trap a pool. I pointed to the camera above the back door. That camera's been recording since you walked in. Every splash, every beer, every bad dance move. Want me to send it to the sheriff, or your husband first? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then she stormed past me, yelling for everyone to get their stuff. One woman asked if the dye would come off in a bath. Another guy was Googling how to fix skin turned blue. Karen shouted, "Don't answer him. He's setting us up." And then they all staggered into the street, wet, blue, and humiliated under the cold stare of my motion floodlights. By the time I walked back into my house, I had already uploaded the footage to a private link and copied the HOA vice president, a woman named Darlene who's been gunning for Karen's seat for years. 10 minutes later, I got a text from her that read, "I think this is the beginning of the end. Also, 10 out of 10 for style." I laughed and made myself a coffee, thinking the night was over. But then, at 4:22 a.m., someone knocked on my front door. I checked the cam. It was Karen, still soaked and now wearing a blanket like a toga, holding up a phone. "I've called the police," she shouted. "You'll be arrested for attempted bodily harm." I opened the door just enough to speak. "You really want to explain to them why you broke into private property to throw a pool party with HOA funds? You want to go that route?" She didn't respond. Just stood there, dripping blue onto my welcome mat like a soggy Smurf. Then she backed away slowly, muttering something about lawsuits and lawyers and city code. I shut the door and sighed. It wasn't just a funny prank. It was the kind of incident that cracks foundations. And something told me this was only the first ripple in what was about to become a tidal wave of HOA drama, power struggles, and wild accusations. But one thing was for sure. Karen would never forget the night she turned blue. And neither would anyone else. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. I didn't even have to check my phone to know something had shifted. People walking their dogs slowed down in front of my house, smirking knowingly as they peeked through the bushes, and two teenagers biking by made exaggerated blue hand gestures at each other, pretending to swim like they were auditioning for a cartoon. The footage I had quietly shared with the HOA vice president, Darlene, must have found its way into the right group chats because by breakfast, it was viral. The HOA had an emergency meeting scheduled for noon, and the only item on the agenda was listed as incident regarding pool use and conduct. I knew what that meant. Karen was going to try and flip the narrative. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building that usually smelled like Lysol and stale coffee. But today, it reeked of tension and embarrassment. I arrived early, sat near the back, and watched the room slowly fill up. Karen arrived last, wearing a scarf that covered half her face and long sleeves despite the summer heat. Her usual army of loyalists, mostly folks who still clung to her monthly newsletter like it was scripture, followed behind her with stiff shoulders and anxious expressions. Everyone else looked curious, cautious, and mildly entertained. Karen stood up immediately and addressed the room with a performance so dramatic it deserved a stage. She began by declaring that she had been viciously entrapped by a resident who weaponized his pool using unregulated chemical agents. She claimed she had been conducting an unofficial safety audit to ensure that all properties met HOA standards for aesthetics and liability. She even waved around a clipboard, pretending it was official documentation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she had 11 people with her at 3 a.m, most of them holding wine glasses, one of them wearing a feather boa. I sat quietly, letting her dig the hole deeper. Then she turned to the board and announced that she was submitting a formal complaint against me for chemical aggression, emotional distress, and reputational sabotage. She slammed a stack of papers down on the table. Someone coughed loudly, probably trying to cover a laugh. Darlene, composed and cool as always, flipped through the papers slowly. Then she held up one and asked, "Did you trespass onto his private property to conduct this audit?" Karen blinked and sputtered, "It wasn't trespassing. I have visual oversight rights as HOA president. It's in the bylaws." Another board member, a retired attorney named Greg, cleared his throat and said, "Actually, no such clause exists. You have no legal access to private property unless invited or unless there's an emergency." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish again. Greg added, "And the dye? I've reviewed the lab report. It's perfectly safe, non-toxic, the equivalent of food coloring. You may be embarrassed, but that's not illegal." Karen started pacing, the scarf slipping slightly to reveal a faint bluish tint on her cheek. She saw people staring and quickly yanked it back up. "He set a trap," she hissed. "He booby-trapped his pool. That's dangerous. Who knows what could have happened?" Darlene leaned forward and said calmly, "What could have happened is that you could have stayed home and not thrown a party in someone else's backyard." The room tensed. One of Karen's supporters stood and tried to defend her, claiming that the dye was a violation of environmental safety, but another resident interrupted and said, "Oh please, I saw the video. You were dancing with a plastic flamingo and fell off the diving board." Laughter rippled through the room. Karen's ears turned red. She grabbed the edge of the table and said, "This is a targeted smear campaign. You're all jealous of my dedication to this neighborhood." Darlene finally stood up. "Enough," she said. "We've reviewed the footage, spoken to the sheriff's department, and checked every complaint filed in the past year. And it's clear that this isn't an isolated incident." She opened a folder and began listing off previous complaints that Karen had filed, some legitimate, most bizarre. Noise violations for someone's wind chimes. A threat of eviction over Christmas lights that were still up on January 2nd. A citation for a child's lemonade stand. The list went on. The room grew quiet as Darlene continued. "We've also received messages from several residents who now feel unsafe because they believe the HOA can access their private property without permission. That is not how this board functions. This is a community, not a kingdom." Karen opened her mouth again, but Darlene cut her off. "And finally, we have documentation that you used HOA funds to pay for the party you threw on his property." Karen froze. Someone in the audience gasped. Another person muttered, "That's theft." Karen tried to deny it, but it was too late. The treasurer, who had been silent until now, confirmed it. "Yes, a transaction was made the day before to purchase beverages and party supplies under the community engagement budget." A long silence followed. Karen's eyes darted around the room. She tried to pivot, saying she was planning an official summer kickoff party and that it just happened to take place early, but no one believed her anymore. The room exploded in voices, some shouting, some laughing, others demanding accountability. Darlene raised her voice to bring the room back. "I'd like to propose an immediate review of leadership and initiate a vote for interim president until we can hold proper elections." A cheer broke out. Karen yelled, "This is a coup! A personal vendetta!" And someone responded, "Yeah, and it's long overdue." Before the meeting could officially adjourn, Karen stormed out, scarf flying off in the wind as she pushed the doors open. The sunlight hit her face, revealing the lingering blue tint that even her heavy makeup couldn't fully hide. Cameras clicked. Someone had called a local blogger who showed up with a DSLR and got the shot. Within an hour, it was online under the headline, "HOA President Goes Full Smurf in Late-Night Pool Scandal." The meme cycle was reborn. Back home, I received a quiet knock on my door. It was Darlene, holding a copy of the incident report and a warm smile. "Thought you'd want the official file," she said. "Also, we might need a new name for our next block party theme." I grinned. "How about Blue Wave Bash?" She laughed and nodded. "Just make sure Karen's not on the guest list." As I closed the door, I realized something had changed in the neighborhood. People weren't afraid anymore. Karen's grip on the community had cracked. And in the strangest, most satisfying way possible, It had all started with a harmless splash of color. But I had a feeling this wasn't the last we'd hear from her. People like Karen don't go down quietly. They regroup. They scheme. And they always think they're one clever step from a comeback. Which meant I needed to stay one step ahead. The storm that Karen had stirred didn't die down, it went viral. By the next morning, screenshots of her blue-stained legs and blurry footage of her screeching while storming out of the HOA meeting were circulating in multiple community Facebook groups. One meme had her photo superimposed next to a Smurf village with the caption, HOA President of Smurf County. Another showed her scowling mid-yell with the words, Blue Tally unfit to lead, in bold above it. By lunchtime, even the local news station caught wind of it. A 2-minute segment aired featuring a reporter standing outside our neighborhood gates, chuckling as he explained the bizarre series of events now dubbed the Blue Pool Brawl. Karen's name wasn't mentioned directly, but the blurred images didn't do much to protect her identity, especially not when half the town already knew the story. That afternoon, my inbox was flooded with interview requests, but I turned them all down. I had no desire to become the accidental spokesperson of anti-Karen resistance. However, one message stood out. It was from a guy named Jay, who owned a community blog called Suburb Wars. He sent a screenshot of Karen's now-deleted HOA announcement post, where she had tried to spin the whole thing by claiming she was a victim of waterborne sabotage by an unstable neighbor with a history of aggressive behavior. Jay included a caption in his email. Care to comment? I already know the truth. Got some great shots of Karen's blue hands at the nail salon this morning. That made me laugh. I didn't respond, but I forwarded the message to Darlene. She replied 3 minutes later with, Tell him to wait for the next HOA meeting. I've got a whole presentation ready. Despite Karen's downfall, she hadn't disappeared. She went quiet publicly, but her scheming had only gone underground. Rumors began spreading, strange ones. People whispered that she was gathering signatures for a petition to disband the current HOA board entirely and reinstall herself through some obscure clause in the bylaws. Another neighbor claimed she saw Karen late at night trying to staple a flyer onto a community bulletin board, only to rip it down a moment later when she noticed a Ring camera blinking nearby. The paranoia she once inflicted on the community had reversed. Now she was the hunted. But instead of letting it go, she doubled down. The next real escalation came 2 days later when a new complaint was filed against me. This time, it wasn't from Karen directly. It was from one of her loyalists, a woman named Cindy who always wore oversized sun hats and used phrases like, the moral fabric of this neighborhood. The complaint accused me of intentionally defaming and humiliating a community leader and creating an unsafe aquatic environment. The HOA board, now no longer under Karen's control, dismissed it immediately. But it wasn't about the complaint. It was about the message. Karen was trying to make noise again, using her supporters to create confusion and sympathy. Then something strange happened. I started getting anonymous tips. Small things at first. One email warned me to check my sprinkler lines. Another suggested I verify that my pool chemicals hadn't been tampered with. At first, I thought they were just trolls, but something about the wording felt personal. I installed new security cameras and doubled the number of alert zones. 2 nights later, I caught a blur on one of them, a person crouching near my pool's filter station. The image wasn't clear enough to confirm who it was, but the height and build looked familiar. I reported it to the police, who couldn't do much without a clearer shot, but I made sure the footage got around. By morning, the incident had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People started checking their own yards, making sure their fences were locked and their outdoor cameras charged. Karen had spent years cultivating control through rules and fines, but now, ironically, she was the one who made everyone feel unsafe. That fear turned into unity. Several neighbors who had never even spoken to each other began exchanging contact numbers, sharing footage, setting up group chats. It was like the entire community had evolved overnight from isolated rule followers into a tight-knit defense squad. Meanwhile, Karen tried to regain her grip through less visible channels. She approached the treasurer privately and accused Darlene of embezzling funds, claiming she had proof that Darlene was spending HOA dues on her garden renovation. That backfired when the treasurer confronted Darlene with the accusation, and she immediately pulled out her receipts. Every flower bed had been paid for personally, with detailed invoices. When word of that failed coup attempt got out, Karen lost even more credibility. But the real punchline came a day later, when someone uploaded a new clip of Karen on a spa day. She was sitting in a sauna, trying to enjoy a quiet moment when the sweat reactivated the remnants of the dye on her neck and chest. The person recording whispered, "It's happening again," as Karen stared in horror at her blue-streaked reflection in the glass. The video went viral instantly. At that point, Karen tried to sue. She filed a formal lawsuit against me for damages, claiming emotional distress, reputational harm, and excessive use of prank technology. Her lawyers sent a threatening letter, but I was ready. I forwarded it to my own attorney, who specialized in property disputes and had already been following the HOA saga with amused interest. Within 48 hours, her lawsuit was laughed out of mediation. The court deemed it frivolous, citing the fact that she had broken into my property in the middle of the night and that the dye used was proven safe. Karen's team withdrew quietly, but not before someone at the courthouse leaked a photo of her leaving the hearing, still faintly tinted blue along the neckline. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. But I underestimated her pride. She wasn't done trying to twist the narrative. Karen launched a podcast. Of all things, a podcast. She called it Neighborhood Watchdog, and billed it as a truth-telling crusade against suburban tyranny. The first episode was recorded in her living room and started with dramatic music and her voice saying, "I was the victim of a blue nightmare." But what happened next changed everything. It was mostly her ranting into a microphone, mispronouncing scientific terms, and accusing everyone from Darlene to the mail carrier of conspiring against her. No one took it seriously, except maybe 2 of her original followers who shared the link on their Facebook pages. Still, it served as a reminder. Karen wasn't going to quietly accept defeat. She didn't care how ridiculous she looked or how many times the dye betrayed her on live camera. She was playing the long game, trying to outlast everyone else through sheer delusion. But she didn't realize that her efforts were only making things worse for her. Every move she made gave the neighborhood more reason to push back. And more importantly, every blunder brought people closer together. Neighbors started gathering casually outside, chatting in driveways, sharing cookies, discussing HOA changes. Someone organized a movie night on the Greenbelt lawn. A few others started planning a community barbecue. I was even asked to help set up a pool safety committee, which was a not-so-subtle jab at Karen's original fake audit excuse. It was clear to everyone that the power she once wielded with fear had turned into something else entirely: comedy. She was no longer the enforcer of order. She was the punchline. But I knew something Karen hadn't figured out yet. When someone like her is backed into a corner, they don't surrender. They double down. They make bigger, bolder, more desperate moves. And as the next HOA meeting approached, a quiet sense of tension returned to the air. Because while the dye had stained her ego, the humiliation hadn't erased her will. It had only made her more dangerous in the most unpredictable way. The neighborhood had rallied once. But would it hold if Karen launched one last power grab? Something told me the next chapter in this saga would decide everything. It was the 4th morning after the HOA meeting when I noticed something off about my pool. The water looked murkier than usual. Not dirty, just slightly cloudy, like someone had tampered with the balance. I leaned in, sniffed it, checked the pump system, then inspected the chemical storage cabinet. Nothing looked broken, but the main chlorine barrel had been nudged slightly, and the cap didn't feel like it was on properly. It wasn't conclusive, but something in my gut told me someone had been here. I checked the security footage from the night before. At around 3:18 a.m., there was a dark figure, hooded, barely distinguishable in the dim light, crouched near the back of the pool shed. They didn't get too close to the cameras and stayed in the blind spot near the filter housing. Whoever it was knew my layout well. That made the list of suspects very short. That same day, I received a visit from a local plumber named Hector. He looked nervous and kept glancing around as he approached my door. When I asked what he needed, he said, "You don't know me, but I've done some side work for people in your neighborhood. I got a call 2 days ago from a lady named Karen. She wanted me to mess with your pool system." My eyes narrowed. "What do you mean mess with it?" He scratched his neck and said, "She said she wanted me to accidentally break a few valves. Told me I'd be paid cash. Said it would force you to drain the whole thing, and then she could start a case to have it shut down permanently." I didn't say anything for a few seconds, trying to let the information settle in my mind. He continued, "I didn't agree to it, but I pretended like I was considering it and recorded the whole call. I've been following the news. You seem like a decent guy. Figured you should have this before something really nasty happens." He handed me a USB drive and left. I played the recording the moment I got inside. It was unmistakably Karen's voice, trying to sound casual, using phrases like, "I just want to reclaim the neighborhood's serenity," and "if the pool's out of commission, we can push through a public repurpose clause." She even joked about turning the area into a reflection garden. The tone of her voice was so smug, so self-assured, that it made my skin crawl. I forwarded the file to Darlene and the city's community safety office. Within an hour, I got a call from a code enforcement officer asking to meet me at my home. He showed up that afternoon with a clipboard, took photos of the pool system, examined the filter, the chemical cabinet, and the footage of the mysterious figure. After about 20 minutes, he shook his head and said, "If what this plumber gave you is legit, she's in violation of both the city code and HOA governance laws. Tampering with utilities, even if she didn't succeed, is serious business." He promised to escalate the matter to the city attorney's office and let me know if formal charges would be filed. I thanked him, and as he left, I felt a shift. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. It had officially entered legal territory. The next HOA meeting was announced the same evening. It wasn't just another discussion forum. It was labeled HOA Special Review Session. The notice included one shocking item: leadership conduct investigation and emergency hearing. Karen was about to face formal review. When I arrived, the room was packed. Dozens of residents, some standing in the back, others sitting cross-legged near the windows, all buzzing with anticipation. Darlene entered with a calm confidence and a stack of documents tucked under her arm. Karen arrived moments later, looking rattled. Her scarf was gone, her expression tight, and for the first time, she didn't have her usual entourage with her. Darlene stood and laid out the case piece by piece. She played the plumber's audio on the clubhouse speaker system, and the room was dead silent as Karen's voice filled the air, plotting the sabotage of my pool. Her tone, once convincing and authoritative, now sounded petty and desperate. When the clip ended, Darlene followed with the timeline of events, the security footage, the city inspector's findings, and a string of written testimonies from neighbors who'd witnessed Karen creeping around homes or harassing residents. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any shouting ever could. Karen, for once, was speechless. She tried to deny it, claimed the audio was edited, said she'd never even spoken to the plumber in question, but her own recorded words made her protest laughable. When she realized her usual deflections weren't working, she pivoted to emotional manipulation. "I've served this neighborhood for 12 years, she said, her voice trembling. "I've given up weekends, holidays, and sleep to protect this community. And now I'm being painted as some criminal because I tried to stop the chaos one man created." A few people murmured, but no one clapped. No one stood in solidarity. The room had shifted. A resident named Marcus, who rarely spoke at meetings, raised his hand. Karen, last month you sent my daughter a warning notice for drawing chalk on our sidewalk. She's 6. You said it was graffiti. Another woman followed. You fined me for putting up a bird feeder. Said it might attract raccoons. More voices joined in, sharing stories of arbitrary fines, surveillance threats, and unprovoked visits. Years of resentment finally had an outlet, and it all came pouring out. Greg, the retired attorney on the board, stood and cleared his throat. In light of the evidence and the growing number of misconduct reports, I motion for an immediate vote to remove Karen from her position and initiate a full audit of her actions over the past 12 months. The motion was seconded instantly. The vote took less than 5 minutes. Of the 32 board members and associate committee leads, 30 voted for removal. 1 abstained. 1 voted against it, Karen herself. She stood up as the results were announced, her face pale, fists clenched. "You're all going to regret this," she spat. "You think you've won? You think I'm just going to disappear?" No one answered. Someone in the back whispered, "We hope so." Karen stormed out, pushing past people, nearly knocking over a folding chair in the process. The door slammed behind her with a finality that felt like a chapter closing. But the drama wasn't done yet. Later that night, as I stood on my patio, sipping a well-earned iced tea, I saw a car drive slowly by my house. It was Karen's. She didn't stop. She didn't roll down the window. She just glared from behind the windshield, as if mentally engraving every brick of my home into memory. I didn't flinch. I just raised my glass in a quiet, mocking toast. If she wanted to try something else, I'd be ready. The following morning, the community group chat lit up. Someone had spotted Karen at City Hall, demanding to speak with zoning officials. Another neighbor saw her photographing various houses, muttering about code violations. She was still trying to cling to whatever power scraps she could salvage. But this time, people weren't scared. They rolled their eyes. They laughed. Someone even created a parody Twitter account called Blue Karen Watch, where they posted fake HOA rules like, "Thou shall not smile on Thursdays," or "Unapproved daffodils will be confiscated." It was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming peace, community, and balance. And while Karen might still try to stir the waters one more time, there was a growing sense that this neighborhood wasn't hers anymore. The dye might have faded from her skin, but the memory of that night, the blue chaos, the exposed truth, the broken grip of tyranny, would never wash away. She had painted herself into a corner, and now she had to sit in it alone. The final blow didn't come from a lawsuit, a security video, or even a dye-stained photo. It came from a party. Not just any party, but one the entire neighborhood had started whispering about ever since Karen was voted out. What started as a joke in the group chat, something along the lines of, "Should we throw a blue bash to celebrate?" had evolved into a full-scale community event, approved by the board, funded by residents, and planned with the kind of energy usually reserved for holiday festivals. Flyers were printed in every shade of blue. The slogan read, "Let's turn the HOA blues into something worth celebrating." The date was set, the guest list open, and for the first time in years, people were genuinely excited to be part of something that didn't involve fear of fines or surveillance. I was asked to host the event in my backyard. At first, I hesitated. Part of me felt like hosting something so public would poke the bear one last time. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about provoking Karen. It was about reclaiming the space, the energy, the joy she had choked out of the neighborhood for so long. I agreed, and suddenly my yard transformed into party central. String lights were hung from the oaks, food trucks were scheduled, and a blue-themed photo booth was set up next to the pool. Ironically, the pool dye system was turned off for the evening, but we kept a few light blue glow sticks floating on the surface for laughs. The turnout was massive. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years showed up with casseroles, drinks, and folding chairs. Kids ran around with blue face paint, Grown-ups wore matching shirts with sarcastic slogans like "Pool tested and approved" and "Blue looks good on me." Music played, people danced, and there was laughter. Real, unrestrained laughter that hadn't existed in this neighborhood since long before Karen's reign. Darlene gave a short speech thanking everyone for their unity and resilience. Greg the attorney raised a toast to peaceful governance and pool privacy. Even Marcus, the quiet guy with the chalk drawing daughter, handed me a six-pack and said, "You started something, man. This place actually feels like a community now." As the sun began to set, the event reached its peak. A few residents projected a slideshow on the back of my garage wall, photos of the past month's chaos. Screenshots of Karen's spa incident, clips of her HOA meltdown, and memes that had spread like wildfire. The finale of the slideshow was a digitally edited image of her beside the Smurfs, with a caption that read, "Thanks for the colorful memories." The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter. It felt like collective therapy, a way to laugh off the trauma and step forward together. But just as the mood settled into comfortable contentment, headlights appeared at the end of my driveway. Everyone turned. A black SUV rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Karen. Her presence alone sucked the noise out of the party like a vacuum. Conversations stopped. The music was turned down. People froze. Karen stood still for a moment, clutching something in her hands, eyes scanning the crowd. She was wearing a blazer far too formal for the occasion, her hair pinned tightly back, face free of visible dye but tense with emotion. In her hands was a clipboard and a thick folder. No one approached her. No one invited her in. But that didn't stop her from stepping forward. Her voice, slightly shaky but firm, rang out. "I've come to serve a cease and desist order." She held up the folder like it was the hammer of justice. "This event defames my character and perpetuates false narrative. I demand the immediate dissolution of this gathering." The silence was sharp. Then, unexpectedly, Darlene stepped forward. She was holding a blue cupcake in one hand and wearing sunglasses shaped like stars. She didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch. She just said, "Karen, go home." Karen's face twisted. "You think you've won? This entire neighborhood is violating multiple city ordinances, noise complaints, parking violations, unauthorized gatherings on private lots." She waved the folder. "I will get legal recourse if I have to." Greg stepped up beside Darlene and said, "You already tried that. The city dismissed it. And for the record, this is a permitted event. Filed under community-led initiative, approved 2 weeks ago. You were notified. You just weren't invited." Karen's eyes darted around, expecting someone, anyone, to stand with her. No one did. Even Cindy, her once devoted supporter, was sitting in the back corner, quietly eating blue Jell-O and avoiding eye contact. Karen's composure cracked. Her voice grew louder. "You're all going to regret this. I kept this place in order for over a decade. And now it's falling apart." That was the breaking point. Marcus stepped forward again, holding his daughter's hand. "No, Karen. You didn't keep order. You controlled us. There's a difference." The applause started slowly. A few claps here and there. Then it built. Like a wave, more neighbors joined until the sound drowned out Karen's angry muttering. She stood frozen, her face turning red, not blue this time. Her arm dropped, the folder slipping to her side. Finally, she turned and stormed back to her SUV, doors slamming shut like the lid on a coffin. The car reversed too quickly, tires skidding slightly as she sped off into the night, disappearing from sight for what we all hoped would be the last time. As the music resumed, a sense of release filled the air. We had confronted the last ghost of her power and sent it packing. People danced harder after that, laughed louder, drank deeper. Someone jokingly dropped a plastic Smurf into the pool. I noticed neighbors staying later than usual, unwilling to let the night end. It wasn't just about celebrating Karen's fall. It was about owning what had replaced it: connection, laughter, a place people wanted to be. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the lights dimmed, I sat by the pool with Darlene and a few others. She leaned back in her chair, looked up at the stars, and said, "Do you think she'll try something again?" I shrugged. "She might. But it won't matter anymore. No one's scared of her now." Greg nodded. "Even if she files more nonsense, we've got precedent. We've got unity. And most importantly, we've got screenshots." Everyone laughed. It was the kind of ending you don't expect in real life, the kind that feels too neat, too perfect. But sometimes, after enough chaos, the universe gives you a clean break. And that night, as I looked around at the people who had once kept their heads down and doors closed, I realized something deeper. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community forged in the fire of pettiness, colored in shades of blue, and stronger than any HOA rule Karen could ever invent. The next morning, someone placed a sign on the community board at the clubhouse. It was made of reclaimed wood, painted carefully, with the words carved in bold letters. No trespassing. No tyrants. No Karen. No one took it down. Not even the new board president. In fact, it stayed there for months. Just a quiet reminder that sometimes, a splash of color is all it takes to wash away years of control. And sometimes, petty justice really is the best kind.